Welcome to round 5 of 2018 NASAT. On my left, I have Virginia B, and Kentucky Cobalt is on my right. We're going to start with toss-up 1. In a 2010 psychological experiment, a person dressed in this way stands in front of a curtain that changes color. A person was asked to dress in this manner in order to replicate a 1975 finding by Neisser and Becklin in which people shook hands instead of playing a hand-slapping game. In that later experiment, a person dressed in this manner appeared in a scenario that also used a tall woman holding an open umbrella. A person dressed in this way appeared during both the easy and hard counting tasks of an experiment designed by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons, in which a person dressed in this fashion tested the inattention blindness.
Like a monkey costume?
Prompt?
Like gorilla suit?
Yes. In 1658, Robert Knox and his father of the same name set out on a trading voyage to Persia. For 9 points each, Knox and his father were shipwrecked and forced to land in Sri Lanka, where they were captured by forces loyal to this kingdom's ruler Raja Sinha II. This kingdom was previously subject to the Kotte Kingdom. Answer. Kingdom of Kandy. Knox spent 19 years in Kandy before escaping to Aripu, which was controlled by this European colonial empire. Jakarta was known as Batavia when it was ruled by this empire.
Netherlands?
Yes. In addition to writing a best-selling account of his journey, Knox brought back the first described sample of this plant to Europe. An edible form of this plant is consumed as bhang in India.
Marijuana.
Sure.
Answer?
Marijuana.
Yes.
Yeah.
20.
Got deep knowledge.
In multivariate ANOVA, Wilks' lambda statistic is equal to the ratio of 2 of these values. One of these values appears under the square root in the denominator of the density of a non-degenerate multivariate normal random variable. The positivity of a set of these values for a certain nested object is one side of Sylvester's criterion. Types of these values known as principal minors appear in the sum used to compute this value via cofactor expansion. Yes. This city was founded by sociology professor Nat Mendelsohn, who bought 80,000 acres of desert in the hopes of outdoing Los Angeles. For example, each name is failed plant city, which is mostly a sprawl of crumbling roads for unbuilt neighborhoods. It is the third largest municipality in its state by area, despite a population of nearly 14,000.
No answer.
California City. Unlike California City, this state's planned city of Cape Coral grew to form a substantial metropolitan area with nearby Fort Myers. That city in the state has over 400 miles of canals, more than any other city on Earth. Answer?
Florida.
This planned city in Tennessee was built for the Manhattan Project. It's still home to the namesake National Laboratory.
Yeah, Oak Ridge.
What?
Oak Ridge.
Yes. 20. An investigation into a faulty object of this type caused C.C. Young to endorse reports that did not jeopardize the funding for another of these objects in the Swing-Johnson bill. The destruction of one of these things, named for St. Francis in 1928, forced William Mulholland into premature retirement. At a dedication ceremony for one of these things in 1935, Harold Ickes sought to change the name of it as a partisan swipe at a political enemy. The construction of one of these edifices named for Michael O'Shaughnessy dramatically changed the Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite National Park, but also created a reservoir.
Damn.
After proposing a hypothesis for the origins of this region, J. Harlan Bretz was invited to debate with 6 challenging elders at the Geological Society of America meeting. For the points each named this barren region in eastern Washington state that, according to Bretz and J.T. Party, was created by a series of cataclysmic glacial lake outburst floods following the last deglaciation, carving out basalt coulees and basins. Answer.
Crater Lake.
Channeled scablands. Bretz's work on the Missoula floods emphasized rare catastrophic events in contrast to this principle popularized by James Hutton and Charles Lyell, according to which the principles that operate today should be used to explain the past.
Uniformitarianism.
Bretz also did influential work on this kind of topography characterized by limestone or dolomite caves and sinkholes. Jovan Cvijic studied the geomorphology of these regions in the Dinaric Alps.
Karst.
Yes. 20. A poem by this author describes praising a forehead called the moon, singing desire into begin, and notes that Septembering arms of year extend less humbly to wealth to foe and friend. That poem describes a person moving through days of we, singing each new leaf out of each tree, and moving through seams of am through halves of give. Another poem by this man describes its title location parenthetically as with up so floating.
E. Common.
Yes.
Yeah.
This author wrote the lines, I had read in books that art is not easy, but no one warned that the mind repeats in its ignorance of the vision of others. In the poem Dürer, Innsbruck, 1495. Teaching is a fictitious poet created by James Macaulay and Harold Stewart to satirize and hoax modernist poetry, published in the magazine Angry Penguins.
Kilgore Trout.
Ernest Malley. The Ern Malley hoax inspired the book My Life as a Fake by this author of Oscar and Lucinda and the True History of the Kelly Gang.
Smith.
Peter Carey. Both Peter Carey and the creators of Ern Malley hail from this country, whose bush poets, such as Banjo Patterson, wrote of life in the outback.
Australia.
Yep. This artist depicted a god slumped on a path across from some orange and white flowers in the background of a painting in which his cousin Zoe gazes into a Versailles-style box containing one of the title orange trees. In that painting, this artist's brother Marshall is reading facing away from the viewer. This artist, who painted view of rooftops, effect of snow, showed a man drying his back with a towel and man at his bath. In a scene by this artist, three shirtless men next to a green bottle use tools on a shiny floor. A dog walks past a man.
Calabot.
Yeah. This physical theorem's proof involves expanding a quadratic term whose cross term, when integrated, disappears since it gives the body center of mass. For Teach named this theorem in classical mechanics, usually expressed as I equals I sub c plus md squared.
Parallel axis.
The parallel axis theorem aids the calculation of a quantity called the moment of this. This term describes the tendency of objects to keep moving at a constant velocity, for example, in the context of Newton's third law.
Inertia.
Given a uniform rod of mass m and length L rotating about one end, the parallel axis theorem can be used to show that the resulting moment of inertia is equal to this fraction multiplied by ml squared.
112. Oh, wait.
I differ.
Wait,
I don't know.
1/3. 20.
What's the thing?
A controversial obelisk in San Francisco claims that 4 5th Artillery members were murdered in Sacramento by the participants of this event. During this event, a captain struck a protester in the head with his saber in Livingston, Montana. Almost a week after this event ended, legislation to create Labor Day was pushed through Congress. John Altgeld called the response to this event government by injunction, believing that Richard only badly misinterpreted the Sherman Antitrust Act. This event was stopped when Grover Cleveland called... Yep. At the assistance of Salvador Dali, this painting was x-rayed, revealing that the artist had painted the ground in this painting over an earlier layer's coffin. For teaching this painting that depicts two farmers with heads bowed between a pitchfork and a cart, reciting the title Evening Prayer.
The Angelus.
L'Angelus was painted by this French realist. In his painting, The Gleaners, three peasant women gather leftover stalks of wheat.
Know it.
Millet was part of this influential romantic realist artistic school, named for a village near the forest of Fontainebleau. Other members included Charles-François d'Aubigny, Théodore Rousseau, and Jules Dupré.
Barbizon School. The Barbizon School.
30.
Nice. That's good. Any tissue?
Yeah.
I'm bleeding.
That's not good. Alright. Toss up 7. The Angirasas do this action on behalf of Indra against the Panis. After Kichaka's death, the Trigartas performed this action against King Virata. That instance of this action occurs on the last day of the Pandavas' exile, so Arjuna is free to reveal himself during the military offensive that occurs in response to this action. A hero engages in a series of single combats in an attempt to prevent an opposing force from performing this action, which culminates in that hero killing Ferdiad. That instance of this action was opposed by Cuchulainn.
Like stealing cows?
Yes.
Cattle rid of, I guess, 21.
Yeah, I just had calibrate and I had to read the others. Alright, so that's 10 points. Answer the following about the relationship between Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X for 10 points each. King and Malcolm only met face-to-face briefly in Washington, D.C. during 1964 debates on this law outlawing discrimination based on race. It was signed into law by Lyndon Johnson in July of that year.
Civil Rights Act.
In a 1965 interview with Alex Haley for this magazine, King said he wished Malcolm would talk less of violence. In another interview for this magazine, Haley interviewed American Nazi leader George Lincoln Rockwell.
The Atlantic.
Playboy. King sent a sympathetic telegram to Malcolm's widow after Malcolm's assassination, but did not comment on whether he believed this leader of the Nation of Islam at the time of the killing was involved in the murder.
I think so.
Farrakhan.
Elijah Muhammad. 10. Close game. It's 95 for Kentucky Cobalt and 100 for Virginia B. Toss up 8. While in opium reverie, this story's narrator sees 4 drops of ruby-colored liquid fall from nowhere into a goblet of wine. The narrator of this story compares the inscrutability of the title character's eyes to a passage attributed to Joseph Glanville, which also serves as the story's epigraph. A character in this story recites a poem about a crowd of angels who watch a play about a writhing blood-red thing that kills everyone else. After the narrator's second wife, Lady Rowena Trevelyan, is struck by fever and dies, life repeatedly returns.
Ligia.
Yes. This aria opens with the words "Thy hand, Belinda," and features chromatic word painting on many of its key words for 10 points each. Name this aria from a 17th century opera in which a character asks, remember me, but forget my fate."
Nessendorva.
When I am laid in earth. This character sings that aria in a Henry Purcell opera named for her and Aeneas. That opera is heavily based on the Aeneid and its stories of this queen of Carthage.
Dido.
What?
Dido.
Yeah. This 20th century composer extensively revised Dido and Aeneas together with Imogen Holst and is thus widely credited for popularizing Purcell's operas with the public. His own operas include Billy Budd and Gloriana.
Britain.
20. One of these compounds can undergo a 1,2 sigma-tropic rearrangement first observed in bicyclic terpenes, and that type of reaction is a Wagner-Meerwein shift. Reacting norbornadienyl chloride with silver ions generated the first stable non-classical example of these species. The facile rearrangement of these species means that S-butyl chains cannot be attached to aromatic substrates via Friedel-Crafts alkylation. Beta-silicon atoms can help stabilize these species by hyperconjugation. Unimolecular nucleophilic substitution reactions proceed via one of these species as an intermediate. Positive inductive effects lead tertiary examples of these species to be more stable than primary ones.
Carbocation.
Yes. Answer the following about philosophers who descended from the Akan people of present-day Ghana for 10 points each. Akan philosopher Anton Wilhelm Amo wrote a 1734 dissertation contesting this philosopher's distinction between the res cogitans and res extensa as described in Meditations on First Philosophy.
Descartes.
This British-born philosopher with an Asante father discussed the ethics of ethnic identity and cultural difference in cosmopolitanism and In My Father's House. Answer. Kwame Anthony Appiah. Kwasi Wiredu, who debated Akan notions of personhood with Kwame Gyekye, wrote his thesis at Oxford under this author of the concept of mind. Answer.
Berkeley.
Gilbert Ryle. 10. Noah Greenberg, W.H. Auden, and Chester Kallman collaborated on an anthology of songs originally accompanied by this instrument. 2 musicians play just one of these instruments in the piece, My Lord Chamberlain, His Galliard. The opening falling tear motif that descends from A to E is an example of the word painting in an air for this instrument called Lacrimae Pavan. Pieces for this instrument by composers like Vincenzo Galilei form the basis of Ottorino Respighi's ancient airs and dances. This instrument, which may have between 5 and 13 courses of strings, accompanies the songs I Saw My Lady...
Harp.
No. I Saw My Lady Weep and Flow My Tears by John Dowland. The guitarist Julian Bream helped revive this period instrument. For 10 points, name this fretted, plucked string instrument with a deep, pear-shaped body.
Mandolin.
No, it's a lute. So at halftime, the score is 150 to 90. Who buzzed on the harp? Okay. Toss up 11. Knocking down LRP1 or overexpressing rage in this structure promotes transport of a pathogenic 42 peptide protein across this structure into the parenchyma. OX26 and 8D3 antibody conjugations target the transferrin receptor in the structure to facilitate receptor-mediated transcytosis. This structure is absent in the area postrema and other circumventricular organs, such as the median eminence, which secretes into the hypophyseal portal system. This structure comprises non-fenestrated endothelial cells nurtured by astrocytic end feet. Its tight junctions limit movement of large and hydrophilic molecules, making it difficult to treat infections in the CNS. For 10 points, yes. A poem about a little girl in this situation begins with a stanza that ends, "Know that in a former time, love, sweet love, was thought a crime." For 10 points each, name the situation which also titles a William Blake poem about a girl named Laika, who was taken to a cave by a pair of lions. A boy in this metaphorical situation is burned at the stake for asking, "Father, how can I love thee or any of my brothers more?"
Dying.
Being lost. Blake's poems about little boys and girls who are lost and found appear in this two-part collection, which also includes The Little Black Boy and The Tiger.
Songs of Innocence.
No, Songs of Innocence and Experience. Songs of Innocence and Experience also includes two poems about boys who labor in this profession, including Tom and Dacre, who dreams of being brought to heaven by an angel with a bright key.
I think it's a Jimmy Sweet. Jimmy Sweet?
Yes, 20. Shimon Bar Giora and Marcus Manlius died at a place named for this person. Immediately following the death of this person, boiling springs were created by Janus to protect the forum. This woman was the daughter of the Citadel commander Spurius and was serving as a Vestal Virgin during the invasion of the Titus Tatius. This person sought gold bracelets from Sabian invaders, but was...
Torpedo?
Yep.
That's
Infants are unable to synthesize this positively charged amino acid, but at each, name this amino acid that is needed to synthesize creatine. It contains a guanidino side chain and is found in high quantities alongside lysine in histones. Answer?
histidine.
Arginine. Arginine is a precursor of the synthesis of this compound, which was originally known as endothelium-derived relaxing factor, or EDRF.
What? No, vasopressin.
Nitric oxide. Nitric oxide promotes relaxation of this type of muscle, which allows it to play a role in vasodilation. Unlike skeletal and cardiac muscle, this kind of muscle is not under voluntary control.
Smooth. Smooth.
Yes. 10. Al-Khazwini described a village where all the buildings were made of this material and local industry was staffed by Masufa slaves. This good is still traded at Berhale, where 2-day caravan journeys bring it from the Danakil Depression. A route used to trade this good was marked by the erstwhile Tree of Tenere. This good is traded on the Taklamt and Azali routes. Around 1600, Taudeni supplanted Tavaza as the main West African point of origin for this good, which is chopped into bricks and loaded onto camels. For 10 points, name this good that was traded southward in the trans-Saharan trade in exchange for gold and was used to preserve food.
Salt.
At a 1976 concert, a drunk Eric Clapton voiced support for the speech, declaring "Keep Britain White." For 10 points each, name this 1968 speech by Enoch Powell denouncing the race relations bill and calling for an end to immigration. Some commentators credit conservative electoral victory in 1970 to this speech. Answer?
Shepherds.
Rivers of Blood. This conservative leader of the opposition at the time sacked Enoch Powell from the Shadow Cabinet in response. During his government, Britain joined the European community, and he imposed direct rule in Northern Ireland after Bloody Sunday.
So, I guess it was the ruler.
Answer?
McDonald.
Edward Heath. Shortly after leaving office, this prime minister remarked that Powell had made a valid argument, if in sometimes regrettable terms. This Iron Lady defeated Heath to become conservative leader in 1975.
After.
10. John Cranko's choreography for this ballet includes large corps de ballet sequences and a street fight that causes fruit to spill across the stage. Its composer originally planned for a sequence of divertissement immediately after the administration of poison and a happy ending that changed the source material. Leonid Lavrovsky's 1940 version of this ballet is now the standard version. This ballet was composed over a summer at the Polinovo's Artist Retreat. It was later excerpted into the Opus 75 suite, 10 pieces for piano, and several orchestral suites, one of which begins with music from its sections. The prince gives his order.
Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah. The first of these things to be discovered was shown to exist in 1861 by Emile Mathieu, while others are named for Zvonimir Yanko and Bernd Fischer. 10 points each. Name these things, of which there are 26. They are integral to a certain proof that spread over thousands of mathematical papers until Michael Aschbacher confirmed the proof to be complete in 2004.
Letters.
Sporadic groups. A more typical set of finite simple groups introduced by Galois are the alternating groups AN, which are simple when n is greater than or equal to this integer. Galois' work also paved the way for Abel's proof that this number is the least for which a polynomial equation is unsolvable in radicals.
5.
One easy case of classifying finite groups is for finite groups that are abelian, which means that multiplication within the group has this property.
Close.
It's commutative. Outside of England, a small evangelical sect called Countess of Huntingdon's Connection only has a current notable presence in this country. An ethnic group in this country held celebrations in which they mocked European practices called Coon Kings. This nation's capital is home to Kingsgate, which bears an inscription that any slave who passes through this gate is declared a free man. That capital of this country was founded under its cotton tree. This country's largest ethnic groups are the Mende and Temne. A small minority in this country are Creole people, descended from black loyalists and other freedmen who returned here,
Liberia.
called the Nova Scotia settlers. The Moa River forms part of this country's border with Guinea and Liberia. For 10 points, name this West African country whose capital is Freetown.
Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Nice.
In this story, the protagonist sits in a laundry room for 15 minutes, contemplating why he is willing to die in someone else's place before giving his interrogators what he thinks to be false intelligence about a gravedigger's shack. For teaching this story in which Pablo Ibieta escapes a death sentence after accidentally telling the truth that Ramon Gris is hiding in a cemetery.
Very old man with a monkey.
The Wall. The Wall is a short story by this French author and philosopher of nausea and no exit.
Sartre.
Yes. While the main characters of The Wall are imprisoned, a Belgian member of this profession comes to visit them, ineffectively trying to comfort them about their sentences. In another existentialist work, Bernard Rieu is a member of this profession.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Doctor.
Yes.
By Campbell.
Alright, so the score after 15 is 185 for Virginia B and 170 for Kentucky Cobalt.
I have 160.
Okay.
I also have 160.
At the half we had 90, right?
Correct.
And then 120.
110.
Let's check. That was bonus number 10.
I think they got the second part.
We did, we only got one.
That's correct. Alright, toss-up 16. This character rhetorically asks, will someone say that I disrespect old age if I intend to dance? In a play in which he arrives at the house of Cadmus intending to head to a festival, but is interrupted by Pentheus, who wants Dionysus dead, despite this character's protestation. This character says you will lose a son of your own loins to Creon before Haemon is found to have killed himself at the end of Antigone. At the start of another play, after a lengthy interrogation, this character tells the title character that you yourself are the criminal you seek. This character...
Tiresias?
Yeah. Answer the following about Supreme Court cases with something in common. Cases such as 1964's New York Times Co. v. Sullivan involve issues of libel and defamation and thus relate to the freedom of the press, a right outlined in its constitutional amendment.
First.
In a 1974 case, the court established protection against defamation claims when lawyer Elmer Gertz sued Robert Welch Incorporated, the legal name of this group, after it published an article insulting Gertz. This group was supposedly named after a missionary who was the first casualty of the Cold War. Answer. John Birch Society. In a 1988 case, the court upheld the right to parody after evangelist Jerry Falwell sued this publisher of Hustler magazine for a satirical ad mocking Falwell. This free speech advocate was paralyzed after being shot by a white supremacist in 1978.
Larry Flint?
Yes. Operators corresponding to this quantity are specified in terms of creation and annihilation operators in the Holstein-Kringelkopf transformation. Networks named for this quantity were developed by Roger Penrose and are used to represent space-in-loop quantum gravity. The interaction of this quantity with an electromagnetic field is described by the Pauli equation, and the coupling of this quantity to orbital angular
Spin.
That was.
This essay was written in response to Francis Fukuyama's The End of History and the Last Man. Benevolent teaching in this essay that defines torn countries and identifies fault lines where conflict will occur. This essay argues that the conflict between cultures will replace ideological struggle in the post-Cold War world.
Clash of civilizations.
This Harvard political scientist developed the Clash of Civilizations hypothesis and coined the term third wave of democratization in his similarly named book analyzing democratic transition under the Carnation Revolution. Samuel Huntington. This British historian of the Middle East used the term Clash of Civilizations in his 1990 essay, The Roots of Muslim Rage. He defended Orientalist scholarship in debates with Edward Said.
Williams.
Bernard Lewis. 10. The sorry. This man wrote. Hold on. Sorry. The priest Horapollon is credited with producing an erroneous guide to carrying out this action. Antoine de Sacy and Johann Ackerblad aided in the first successful modern attempt to perform this action, outlined in the letter to Monsieur Dacier. The third volume of a book by Athanasius Kircher, partially titled For Oedipus, is a guide to doing this action, which he based in part on his knowledge of Coptic. Polymath Thomas Young made a major advance in attempts to do this by positing that the text inside a cartouche could be the name of an important person.
Translating hieroglyphics.
Yeah. This composer wrote a notturno in A-flat for solo piano, which became the third part of his Liebesträume, or Love's Dreams, for 10 points each. Named as piano virtuoso who depicted a Cossack warrior in Mazeppa and wrote the overture Tasso. Mazeppa and Tasso are examples of this genre of single-movement orchestral programmatic works, which Liszt invented. Yeah, either. This is Liszt's third symphonic poem, although it was the first piece on which he applied that label. It uses music from the four elements and derives its program from an ode by Alphonse de Lamartine.
Rhapsody on Paganini.
Les Préludes. 20. This man wrote about how, like a yellow silken scarf, the thick fog hangs along the quay. In a poem dedicated to Marcel Schwab, this writer enjoined a lovely, languorous creature to sing me all your memories, and described it as half woman and half animal. A voice whispers that fellow's got to swing about a man who walked amongst the trial men in a suit of shabby gray in one of this man's poems. This author of Symphony in Yellow and the Sphinx, wrote a poem that claims the coward does it with a kiss, the brave...
Wow.
Yes. Before becoming an unruly Arhat, this servant explains sights to a prince, including a dead man and sadhu, or wandering ascetic, for 10 points each. Named as charioteer, who, with the help of the horse Kantaka, guided Siddhartha Gautama around Kapila Vastu to see the 4 sights. Answer?
Arjun.
Chana, or Chanaka. This avatar of Vishnu is frequently depicted as a charioteer. He counsels Arjuna on the eve of battle in the Bhagavad Gita, part of the Mahabharata.
Krishna.
Bangkok is home to the Wat Arun, which is named for the charioteer of this Hindu sun god. He is often depicted in a celestial chariot pulled by 7 horses.
Surya, right? Or Surya?
Yeah,
That's
20. Last toss-up. Some scholars think the author of this book must not have been Jewish, since he seems to have misunderstood the Hebrew poetic parallelism in Zechariah. That misunderstanding led to Christ uniquely entering Jerusalem astride 2 donkeys in this gospel. This book uses the word Israelites up to the crucifixion, and afterwards switches to Iudaeoe. In a group of statements in this book known as the antitheses, prefaced with "You have heard it said," Jesus tells the listeners to follow abstract principles even more rigorously than concrete rules, exemplifying his claim that in this gospel that he has not come to abolish the law but to fulfill it. 14 points give this gospel that presents Jesus as the Jewish Messiah and contains the Sermon on the Mount.
Mark.
No.
Matthew.
Yes. Is that Jacob or? Sorry.
I mean, there's
You've noticed Anna imagines herself as a kindergarten teacher suffering from a syndrome called acquired toilet disease in this woman's play, The Baltimore Waltz. For teach English-American dramatist who described a girl sexually abused by her charismatic Uncle Peck in the 1998 play How I Learned to Drive.
Women.
Answer.
Hellman.
Paula Vogel. Vogel was nominated for a Tony in 2017 for this play, which dramatizes the controversy generated by the American premiere of Sholem Ash's play, God of Vengeance.
Recent plays.
Answer.
Hamilton.
Indecent. God of Vengeance was originally written in this language. A rich theatrical tradition in this language was created by Ashkenazi Jews in Europe and America.
Yiddish.
Yeah. Alright, the final score is 285 for Virginia B, 190 for Kentucky Cobalt.